They moved mountains, reshaped coastlines, and shook the ground so hard, operators said you could feel it in your teeth. These weren't just bulldozers, they were mechanical monsters that redefined what raw power meant on a job site. Some had 2 engines, some weighed 70 tons, one could spin on its own axis, and yet every single one of them was killed off, either by politics, economics, or something even bigger coming along. These are 10 dozers so powerful, the world wasn't ready for them. Number 10. The Caterpillar D9G. If you followed heavy equipment through the 1960s and early 70s, you already know the D9G. It was the machine, the one every contractor wanted, every mining company depended on, and every competitor feared. Introduced by Caterpillar in 1961, the D9G produced 385 horsepower and ran on Caterpillar's legendary D353 engine, a power plant so reliable it was trusted in this machine for over 2 decades without fundamental change. In 13 years of production, Caterpillar built nearly 15,000 D9Gs, and every single one of them was a workhorse. But the D9G's story is bigger than just its production numbers. This was the machine that inspired an entire generation of extreme equipment experiments. In 1965, a West Coast businessman named Buster Peterson hooked up a pair of D9Gs end-to-end to push-load the largest wheel tractor scrapers ever built. That side-by-side concept, 2 D9Gs working as one, eventually led to Caterpillar developing the official SXS D9G in 1969, a machine pushing a 24-foot wide blade with a combined 770 horsepower. The sheer audacity of that idea tells you everything about how extraordinary the base D9G was. By 1974, the D9G was replaced by the D9H, which brought engine power up to 410 horsepower through aftercooling the same D353 engine. And while the D9H was superior, many operators mourned the simplicity and raw character of the D9G. Today, very few survive. Most were worked until they had nothing left to give, then scrapped or exported to markets where they were run into the ground a second time. The D9G wasn't phased out because it failed. It was phased out because it was simply too successful. It made Caterpillar confident enough to go even bigger. Number 9. The Caterpillar D9 HSXS side by side. Speaking of going bigger, let's talk about one of the most fascinating machines Caterpillar ever produced. The side-by-side D9H, known as the SXS D9H, was the factory evolution of Buster Peterson's original concept. 2 full D9H crawler tractors were mounted side-by-side on a shared frame, pushing a massive 24-foot blade. The combined output, a staggering 820 horsepower. That's from 2 engines, 2 transmissions, and 2 complete drivetrains, all working together in one incredible machine. This wasn't a prototype or a custom build. Caterpillar actually put it into limited production. Between the earlier SXS D9G sets and the D9H successors, only 11 D9G sets and 13 D9H sets were ever built. They were used primarily in strip mining, where enormous amounts of overburden had to be moved as quickly as possible to expose coal or mineral seams beneath. And for that job, the SXS D9H was absolutely terrifying in its effectiveness, so why was it discontinued in 1977, just 3 years after the D9H version entered production? 2 reasons. First, Caterpillar was developing something entirely new, the D10, which would achieve comparable power output from a single engine and a revolutionary new undercarriage. Second, the SXS configuration had real practical limitations. Ripping was essentially impossible with a machine of that configuration, and the sheer complexity of maintaining 2 complete drivetrains in the field drove operating costs sky high. When the D11N arrived in 1986 and produced 770 horsepower from a single 8-cylinder engine with far better fuel economy, the case for the SXS concept was permanently closed. Only 24 sets total were ever built. They remain some of the rarest Caterpillar machines in history. Number 8. The Euclid TC-12. If the Caterpillar SXS D9 was bold, the Euclid TC-12 was something else entirely. This machine, introduced in 1955 by the Euclid division of General Motors, was the world's most powerful crawler tractor at the time of its launch, and it got there in the most fascinating way imaginable. It ran 2 complete engines, 2 transmissions, and 2 independent drivetrains, one powering each track, all mounted on a split frame that could flex and oscillate over uneven ground. The TC-12 used a pair of GM 671 inline diesel engines, each one affectionately called a Screaming Jimmy by the operators who ran them, because of their high-pitched howling exhaust note under load. 2 of those engines running simultaneously at full throttle was described by people who heard it as something close to an assault on the eardrums. The total output from the 2 engines varied across models. The original TC-12 produced around 388 horsepower when launched, and subsequent upgrades pushed it to 425 net horsepower in the 1958 TC-12-2 version. At that time, the Cat D9, their closest single-engine competitor, produced just 287 horsepower. The TC-12 wasn't just ahead, it was in a different league. What made it even more remarkable was how it steered. Because each track was powered by its own engine, the operator could control them independently. One track in forward, one in reverse, allowing the 35-ton machine to execute full spin turns on its own axis. No other large crawler in the world could do that. It was more maneuverable than machines half its size. In 1966, GM's Euclid division renamed the machine the 8280, but the core design remained unchanged. Then, in 1968, GM was hit with an antitrust suit that forced it to spin off the crawler tractor division, which was rebranded as Terex. Terex continued building the machine under the 8280 name until 1974, when it was finally discontinued. Total production across all variants, just 901 machines. Why did it die? Complexity. The TC-12 required extraordinary maintenance discipline to stay healthy. 2 engines meant twice the service intervals, twice the potential failures. In the used equipment market, a neglected TC-12 was essentially worthless, too expensive to repair, too complicated to run cheaply. By 1974, single-engine Dozers had caught up in power, and the economic argument for the TC-12 simply collapsed. But for those who heard it at full throttle, or who sat in its cab as it spun on its axis, the TC-12 was unlike anything else that ever ran on tracks. Number 7. The Allis-Chalmers HD-41. The Allis-Chalmers HD-41 holds a very specific and very important place in bulldozer history. It was the largest crawler tractor in the world when it entered full production in 1970. Allis-Chalmers had actually teased the concept way back in 1963, when they put a prototype on display at the Chicago Road Show. But the engineering challenges were enormous, and the company spent 7 years testing and refining the design before committing to series production. The final machine was a monster. At approximately 65 to 70 tons of operating weight and powered by a Cummins VT1710C, a turbocharged V12 diesel displacing 1,710 cubic inches and producing 524 horsepower, the HD-41 was in a class of its own. The Cummins VT1710 was an engine so massive it required a radiator to match, and the machine itself stood 13 feet tall, was over 20 feet long, and ran a blade that could be configured up to 22 feet wide. Standing next to one at ground level, the tracks came up to a grown adult's shoulders. In the field, the HD-41 was genuinely astonishing. It could rip hard material traveling uphill, something the Cat D9G of the same era simply could not do. It could outproduce the D9G substantially on virtually any job where both machines competed. But it also had a serious weakness. The drivetrain and final drives were not built robustly enough for the horsepower being put through them. In extremely demanding conditions, hard ripping, dozing solid rock, the HD-41 tore through final drives and tracks at a rate that alarmed fleet operators. Some companies in Australia reportedly had to detune their HD-41s by as much as 80 to 100 horsepower just to keep them running reliably. In 1974, Fiat SPA of Italy purchased a controlling stake in Allis-Chalmers' construction division, forming the joint venture Fiat-Allis. The machine was rebranded as the Fiat-Allis 41B and continued in production until 1982 with various mechanical improvements. Total production across both the Allis-Chalmers and Fiat-Allis periods was approximately 3,000 machines. But by the mid-1970s, the HD-41 had already been surpassed in the size race by Komatsu's D455A and Caterpillar's new D10, and it never recovered its position at the top of the market. The 41B line was discontinued in 1982, and with it, one of the most genuinely powerful and genuinely troubled machines ever to run on tracks. Number 6. The International Harvester TD25. The International Harvester TD25 doesn't always get the attention it deserves, but this machine had one of the longest production runs of any major crawler tractor in American history, and it was genuinely excellent. Launched in 1959 to replace the earlier TD24, the TD25 arrived with a brand new International DT817 turbocharged 6-cylinder diesel engine producing 230 horsepower. At that time, it competed directly with the Caterpillar D8H, and by most accounts, it held its own. What's remarkable about the TD25 is how methodically International Harvester developed it over the years. The TD25B arrived in 1962 with refinements and better reliability. The TD25C followed in 1974 with 285 horsepower and a substantially redesigned hood and cab. And in 1979, the TD25E brought power up to 310 net horsepower, now competing with the Cat D8K. In 25 years of continuous development, International Harvester built a machine that contractors genuinely trusted, and that trust was hard-earned on road construction sites, pipeline rights-of-way, and open pit mines across North America. But the machine's fate was sealed by events that had nothing to do with engineering. International Harvester was in serious financial trouble by the early 1980s. The company, one of America's great industrial giants, had overextended itself, and under severe financial pressure, it sold its entire construction equipment division to Dresser Industries in 1984. Dresser continued building the TD25E and eventually introduced the TD25G, but the brand identity was gone. International Harvester's name disappeared from the side of the cab. Later, Komatsu took a 50% stake in Dresser, and the TD25 lineage eventually passed to a Polish company called HSW Industries, where it was manufactured under the Dresser name. The TD25 was a victim of corporate collapse, not technical failure. The machine itself was sound. It was the company behind it that couldn't survive. And that's perhaps the saddest kind of discontinuation, when a great machine is orphaned not by the market, but by the industry forces swirling around it. Number 5. The Komatsu D455. In 1976, Komatsu fired a shot across the bow of the entire industry. The D455A arrived with 620 horsepower and a weight of approximately 167,000 pounds, about 76 tons, making it the largest and most powerful production bulldozer in the world at that time. In fact, the D455A's power output was so alarming to Caterpillar that it directly accelerated the development and release of the D10 in 1977. Komatsu had forced Caterpillar's hand. The D455A was an important machine in the broader context of the global equipment industry. Komatsu had been building its bulldozer line throughout the 1960s and early 1970s, steadily competing with Caterpillar in Asian and international markets. The D355A, a capable mid-size machine, had been selling well, but the D455A was a statement. It said that Komatsu wasn't just competing in bulldozers, it intended to lead. In practical terms, the D455A was used primarily in large surface mining operations and major civil construction projects. Its ripping capability was formidable, and its blade capacity allowed it to move enormous volumes of material per pass. But the machine's production run was relatively short. By the late 1970s and early 1980s, Komatsu's engineering focus had shifted toward what would become the D575A, the superdozer, which would eventually dwarf even the D455A. The D455A was discontinued as Komatsu concentrated resources on its next generation of large dozers, with the D475A eventually becoming the standard-bearer for Komatsu's large machine lineup. The D455A's window of dominance was brief, just a few years at the very top, but its impact on the industry was permanent. Number 4. The Caterpillar D10. There is no bulldozer in history quite like the original Caterpillar D10. When it was introduced in September 1977, it was the most powerful track-type tractor ever built, period. 700 horsepower from a twin-turbocharged V12 D348 diesel engine in a machine weighing approximately 190,000 pounds. 93 patents were filed in its development. The engineering team that built it spent years in prototype testing, including destroying multiple test machines deliberately at Caterpillar's Arizona proving ground to map component life expectancies. The D10 was not just powerful, it was engineered to a depth that the industry had never seen before. The defining innovation was the elevated sprocket, what Caterpillar called the high drive system. Prior to the D10, every crawler tractor placed the drive sprocket at ground level, meaning it was subjected to constant shock loads from terrain, abrasive dirt and rocks. The D10 raised the sprocket high above the tracks, isolating the drive train from those shock loads entirely. The suspension could now flex and conform to the ground independently. Track life extended dramatically. Operator fatigue dropped. Maintenance intervals lengthened because access to the transmission and final drives was simplified. A job that took 45 hours on a D9H took 9 hours on a D10. The Caterpillar team generated 93 patents covering every system of this concept. In the mining industry, the D10's impact was immediate and profound. Studies showed that the cost per cubic yard of material moved with a D10 was comparable to that of much larger dragline excavators, meaning a dozer was now cost competitive with machines that had previously been in a completely different economic category. The D10 was 50% more productive than the D9H it effectively replaced in high production applications. But the original D10 produced at Caterpillar's East Peoria plant from 1978 to 1986 was discontinued when Caterpillar restructured its entire large dozer lineup under the N-Series designation. The D10 gave way to the D11N, a new, even larger machine with 770 horsepower, and the D10's model slot was renumbered. The name D10 lived on through subsequent generations, D10N, D10R, D10T, D10T2, but the original, the revolutionary, industry-changing 700 horsepower machine from 1977 was gone in just 9 years of production. In that time, fewer than 1,000 were built. Each one of them changed the world a little bit. Number 3. The Fiat-Allis FD-50. When Fiat-Allis discontinued the HD-41B line in 1982, they didn't walk away from large dozers, they doubled down. The FD-50 was their answer, a massive 80-ton crawler tractor powered by a Cummins VT28C diesel engine and representing the most capable machine Fiat-Allis had ever built. The FD-50 was competitive in size and capability with the Caterpillar D10 and the Komatsu D455A, and it was aimed squarely at the large surface mining market where these machines earned their keep. Fiat-Allis had built significant institutional knowledge through the HD-41 and 41B programs, and the FD-50 addressed many of the reliability issues that had plagued those earlier machines in severe applications. The drivetrain was more robust, the maintenance access was improved, and the machine was designed from the outset for the punishing demands of continuous mining operation. But the market didn't reward it. By the mid-1980s, Fiat-Allis was struggling. The global construction equipment market was in a downturn. Large dozers were expensive to build and sell in relatively small numbers, and Caterpillar's D10, with its industry-leading reputation and superior parts support network, was essentially untouchable in the market segment the FD-50 was targeting. Fiat-Allis transferred all of its earth-moving manufacturing to Italy and eventually withdrew from the North American market. The FD-50 was discontinued by 1989, just 7 years after it entered production. It left behind a small population of machines and a large question about what might have been if market conditions had broken differently. Number 2. The Caterpillar D9H. You might wonder why the D9H appears so high on this list, given that we've already talked about the D9G. The reason is simple. The D9H is arguably the most significant conventional track-type tractor Caterpillar ever built, and its discontinuation marked the end of an era that will never be repeated. The D9H arrived in 1974 with 410 horsepower, an improvement over the D9G's 385 HP achieved by adding aftercooling to the proven D353 engine. In its standard single-unit configuration, the D9H was used across every major category of heavy earth-moving. coal mining, hard rock quarrying, large highway construction, dam building, land reclamation. It was trusted on every continent and in virtually every climate. And the side-by-side D9H, the double version we talked about earlier, pushed 820 combined horsepower in applications where raw blade force was the only thing that mattered. The D9H holds a unique distinction in Caterpillar's own records. It remains to this day the most powerful conventional track-type tractor in Caterpillar's history. Every successor, the D9L, D9N, D9R, D9T, uses the elevated sprocket high drive system. The D9H was the last of the old-school low-drive D9 configurations. When it was discontinued in 1981 and replaced by the D9L, which adopted the same high-drive undercarriage as the D10, something fundamental in the Caterpillar lineage ended. The era of the conventional large dozer, the direct descendant of the machines that built the American highway system, pushed back the jungles of Vietnam and scraped coal from the Wyoming seams, was over. The D9H was its last and finest expression. Number 1. The Euclid Terex 8280. Our number 1 slot goes to a machine that is almost completely forgotten today, and that's exactly the tragedy. The Terex 8280, the evolved descendant of the original Euclid TC-12, represented the absolute peak of the twin-engine crawler concept. Built from 1966 when Euclid renamed the TC-12 lineup, through 1974, the 8280 was the final and most developed version of what the engineers at General Motors' Euclid division had been building since 1955. By the time the 8280 was in production, the machine had been refined through multiple generations. The oscillating split frame, which allowed each half of the machine to flex independently over uneven terrain, was a piece of mechanical engineering that no single-frame machine of comparable size could match for ground-following ability. The twin GM 671 engines, by the final iteration, were extracting their maximum rated output, and the machine's ability to spin on its central axis remained utterly unique. But the 8280 shared all the fundamental problems of the TC-12 that preceded it. The mechanical complexity was enormous. The maintenance demands were unforgiving. The machine had to be split into 2 halves for highway transport, a process that required specialized equipment and expertise. And in the used equipment market, a poorly maintained 8280 was essentially impossible to sell at a reasonable price. When Terex discontinued the model in 1974, only 901 total units had been built across the entire TC-12 and 8280 family combined. What makes the 8280's story the most poignant on this list is not just how good the machine was, it's how comprehensively the industry moved on from everything it represented. The twin-engine split-frame concept was never revived by any major manufacturer. Single-engine dozers, growing ever more powerful, made the twin-engine approach economically pointless. Today, a running Euclid TC-12 or Terex 8280 is one of the rarest sights in the world of working vintage iron. A handful survive in the hands of collectors and historical equipment societies, where they're demonstrated at shows to crowds who have never seen anything like them and likely never will again. When one of them fires up, both engines catching, that unmistakable shriek of 2 screaming jimmies spinning up together, the ground vibrating, the massive machine rumbling to life, you understand immediately why the people who ran these machines never forgot them. They weren't just tools, they were experiences. If you want to see more deep dives into the history of heavy equipment, the machines that built the world, the engineering stories behind them, and the untold histories of the giants that got left behind, hit subscribe and ring that notification bell.